today. Kind of nice. And usually we don't tell this story until Christmas Eve. So it's pretty special that Jesus is already here. So Christmas Eve, we're saving one more sliver of the Manger story. So Tuesday, you'll have to come back. So today ends in a cliffhanger. Just kidding. So welcome to the fourth Sunday of Advent. So it's mini Christmas today, full bore Tuesday, and there's Christmas more up our sleeve next Sunday. So soak up this amazing season. And this season, we have been reading that book called the Bible. And the book within the book is the Gospel of Luke. And we've been taking in warm and delicious words from the Gospel of Luke that changed the world. And each Sunday, we have met different people from the Gospel of Luke. So the first Sunday, we met Zachariah and Elizabeth. And Zachariah and Elizabeth heard news that they were going to have a baby. That baby turns out to be John the Baptist. You guys are doing good without the kids in here to tell you the answers. So yeah, I didn't do it with them in here. So that was the first week. The next week, we met Elizabeth again. And Elizabeth went to visit her friend Mary. And Elizabeth, we saw, was such an encouraging friend. And then Mary got a big song that we call the Magnificat that day. And then last week, Zachariah returned. Elizabeth had her baby. And Zachariah got a big song, too, about God's love for everybody and how this changes the world. So finally today, we get to hear the next story in Luke. And the story today begins with not a warm and friendly face. It begins with empire. Empire. So familiar words from Christmas Eve, Luke 2, verse 1. It was in the days of Emperor Caesar Augustus. So it starts with this emperor, Caesar Augustus. And he had this decree, this strange rule that all the people needed to be registered or go to a census. And it was everybody had to do this big bureaucratic thing. And we imagine that this big decree from on high, from the emperor, people had to go out in the streets. They were from their one place of residence, and then they had to go back to their homeland or something. That's what we deduce reading the story. So we picture this teeming mass of people who are supposed to do this, follow the rules of empire. And in that teeming mass of people from across the Roman Empire and across Syria, where Quirinius was the ruler, in that sea of people, we finally do see one face. And the face in the crowd is Joseph. We finally meet Joseph face to face today. We heard about him in one of the Mary Weeks, but here we get a little focus on Joseph. And Joseph, it says, is part of a tribe of David. And so for this big empire thing, he had to go from where he was living up in Nazareth and travel all the way down to Bethlehem, which was his tribal city. The tribal city of David was Bethlehem. And so he set out. And then the text says, and by the way, he was engaged to Mary, who was expecting a baby. And then they came into that region, and they got a hotel. Did they? No. Was there room for them in the inn? No. And we deduce that since he landed in a manger, that an animal feeding trough, that were they, staying in a stable? We deduce that. And some of our Christmas carols say he was staying, maybe had a little roof over his head like an animal, like a shed. And that is where Jesus was born. What a crazy story, really. We read this every Christmas Eve, and maybe if it's Christmas Eve, I wouldn't say that out loud, that it's a crazy story, because people would be like, what? What do you mean? This is the story I know. I know this story. It's so familiar. It's the most famous story. Maybe it's the only story people know about Christianity. But if you think about it, it's pretty wild. If it was my plan, if it was Sarah's plan, and I was up in Nazareth, I thought this through. First of all, if I was in Nazareth and I was Joseph, I would have gone to the local bureaucrat and said, my wife is very pregnant. We are not going right now. We are not going. Take a look at her. And I think I would have negotiated and said, yes, we'll go, but give us a little time. The timing is terrible on this. And maybe I kind of put it in the line of jury duty, Have anybody played that card, like, I cannot do jury duty this time, and gotten out of it? I mean, they let you out of jury duty or delay. And Joseph was obedient. He would do it. But the timing was terrible. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Anybody can see if you don't travel with somebody who's very, very pregnant and do this. Doesn't make any sense. The second part of Sarah's plan, if it had been up to me, was in Bethlehem. Okay, if I came into town with my very, very pregnant wife, and I went to the inn and said, is there a room? And they said no. I mean, what would you do? I go up to Russ and say, Russ, I got my pregnant wife here. Won't you give up your room for me? I think Russ would give up his room. Wouldn't you? Whatever Sarah wants. I like that. He's on Sarah's plan. Marilee must miss you. I just think that, normal people would see these people need the room, not me. This person's pregnant, very, very, very pregnant. Yes, you take the room. I'll sleep out there. So I think it's a really odd story. So, what's up with that? And one thing I thought about was, does the story demonstrate God's plan? That God can overcome whatever human barrier there is and get the job done. It's just, whatever bureaucratic empire thing's going on, God is still at work. Whatever local blindness to need is going on, God will find a way to make God's plan work. So I thought, is that what's going on? Another thought I had about why? What's the gist of this story? I thought maybe Luke, the writer, the rememberer, is trying to point out how inhospitable the world was. How not set up for people in need the world was. From the bureaucracy up in Nazareth, the empire, where they couldn't get a little negotiation about timing, come on now, right to Bethlehem itself. How could Bethlehem be so blind to the need of its neighbors or travelers or, hello, the person's expecting a baby? How could Bethlehem not get it? What is up with Bethlehem? Because Bethlehem ought to know better. As a place that's the center of the tribe of David, they knew better because it was in their law, what we call the Old Testament. It was in their Torah. A couple of verses here for us to take a look at. I have a little PowerPoint magic for you today. I know you love it when I do PowerPoint magic. So let's go. Yeah. So I know you all love Leviticus, right? You're big Leviticus fans. Why do we always make Leviticus the butt of our jokes? There is such good stuff in Leviticus. So take a look at this one. When a stranger lives with you as a stranger in the land, you must not wrong them. So step one, you are not to oppress strangers. It says in Leviticus. It goes on. As a native among you shall the stranger be, who lives as a stranger with you. Kind of repetitive, Leviticus. We get the point. And, okay, not only that, you shall love them as you love yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Holy One, your God. So this comes direct, God's lips to their ears. So don't wrong strangers, love strangers, not just neighbors, strangers, not just your family members. Love them as yourself. And then rooted in your own personal experience of being strangers. So these people, God's people in what we call the Old Testament had been wanderers and strangers and had been in Egypt before they ever bounced back into where they ended up living. And it's just part of God's holiness, maybe because we're made in God's image. So there's more in the Old Testament Torah. So this is a snippet from Deuteronomy, an echo. You shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So that's Deuteronomy. It's also in Exodus, a couple places in Exodus. And then it's interesting if you zoom out and look at the bigger context of that Deuteronomy passage. For the Lord your God is a God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, almighty and awesome, who is not partial and takes no bribe, who executes justice for the orphan and the widow, and who loves the strangers, providing them food and clothing. You shall also love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So a wonderful writer and theologian who wrote this fabulous article on hospitality in the Presbyterian Outlook, it was in April of this year. I clipped her article and I've kept it with me all year long. And it's just been so, so seminal in my thinking. I think it connects to our church's theme this year. But anyway, she notes that these verses start with extravagant praise of God. God, you are extraordinary. You are magnificent. You are fabulous. Look at all you do. So extravagant praise for God, and then ends with an extravagant claim on God's people to be like God. You are also to be like God. An extravagant demand on God's people. So I think those are my three things. So, into thinking about that, randomly yesterday, I heard a story. And it was an interview with people who were kidney donors. Anybody here ever donated a kidney? I don't see anybody. Anybody ever donated a kidney to a stranger? Not just your loved one, to a stranger. So this story was about people who donated a kidney to a stranger. So just biological facts, you only need one kidney. So literally, you could give up your other kidney and function. It's okay. And there is a huge demand for kidney donors. Was that what Dan had? Dan got a donation.
Yep, twice. That was the second one.
Wow. Did he know his donors?
His first one, yes, it was his mother.
Oh, his mom gave him a kidney.
Yeah, and his last one,
It was a stranger. Wow. So is that extraordinary? People who would donate a kidney. And then this other person they interviewed in this story also donated part of his liver. It's like 60% of his liver, because your liver can regenerate. And that person was, like 9 months later, he was doing Ironman stuff. I mean, he was like a triathlete. So it did not hold him back. So just little public service announcement. It is possible to donate a kidney. I mean, maybe not for everybody, but it's within the realm of possibility. So this is a thing, and then strangers do this. And it is so remarkable that a neuroscientist studied kidney donors who donate to strangers. Isn't that cool? So since 2010, she studied the brains of people who donated organs to strangers. And she calls these people extraordinary altruists. Extraordinary altruists. People who sacrificially give beyond ordinary giving. And what she has found in the brains of these extraordinarily generous people is that amygdala, and gee, I love brain science, and usually when the amygdala comes up, the amygdala is located kind of near your brainstem. It's kind of back there, distinguished from your midbrain and your frontal lobes, your thinking brain. But amygdala, I kind of think about being your survival brain, flight, fight, freeze. Maybe it's the brain where you'd retaliate against somebody or something like that. Well, the brains of these extraordinary altruists, their amygdala was larger than other people's amygdala. So their emotional processing center was larger than others. That's amazing. And then they also looked at the amygdala, and they studied this, where if the person themselves felt pain, what did their brain look like? And then if someone else was experiencing pain, what did their brain look like? And they found that these extraordinary altruistic people, they experienced pain the same, pretty much. It was the same pathway for them having pain and for someone else having pain. They could feel somebody else's pain, which, what's the word for that? Empathy? Empathy. They had empathy for others. So isn't that fascinating? It's almost like the Bible, God, Old Testament know that we are made in God's image, in that human beings have this capacity to be like God and have empathy for strangers. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary because it's a godlike quality, and the godlike quality is empathy, care for others who are in pain. And that walked me back to Jesus and his parents' experience and how he grew up. And do you suppose he heard from his parents what it was like in Bethlehem and how there was no room, but it was a manger that took them in? And that experience, maybe it could have made them bitter. Maybe it would make them want to retaliate. But that's not apparently how it impacted Jesus. It made Jesus care about other people. Jesus maybe helped his generation remember the Torah, the teaching about the stranger, because maybe people had forgotten what that was. And into that generation, Jesus said, you are to love God, you are to love your neighbor as yourself. Elsewhere in the Gospels, you are to love not just the stranger, you're to love. You remember this one? I always bring it up. You're always not like, I never like to hear this one. You're also supposed to love your enemy. Your enemy. That's extraordinary altruism beyond me, usually. That's the path that Jesus took. And when we study Luke in 2025, we're going to see that familiar story about the Good Samaritan. About some religious people saw someone in a ditch, and they're like, oh, nothing we can do about it. And then a religious outsider was the one who was the neighbor and looked out for things. So that makes me think, the Gospel of Luke, what's up with him telling this story and telling it in a particular way? The Gospel of Luke today started with empire and ends with a manger. It hit me that it starts with empire and it ends with empathy. A God who relates to those on the outside, people for whom there is no room, people who have been turned away and harassed. If you have felt pain, God feels your pain. That is the God we believe in. Is that amazing, good Christmas news or what? Take that in. God cares for you, loves you in your pain, and you are made in God's image and have that same capacity to be empathetic to others. I think God says to us, you have a manger in your heart where Christ is born every year, where the Spirit is alive and helps us be welcomers. And you know what? That sounds like Discovery's theme this year. What is it? Joyful inclusion. We've had joyful inclusion. This manger, this cross is a big symbol for us, and the manger for us is a symbol of joyful inclusion. Merry Christmas, Discovery. To God be the glory. Amen.